Everyone, I'm Angie. Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to see your faces today. We were worried our Zoom room wasn't functioning properly, so great to see you all, especially great to see you all. Happy Friday. This is work group meeting number 4. I'm Angie Brewer, the project manager from DLCD's team on this work. And I'm joined by my DLCD colleagues and the team from Echo Northwest. So thank you all for being here. This is work group meeting number 4, as I said, and I just want to underscore that a few times probably today because we have one more meeting scheduled after this. So I would just encourage you that if you haven't participated yet or you haven't spoken up yet, this is one of the last chances in this group setting to have your voice heard and to participate fully. So I would just encourage you that if you haven't yet taken the time to lean in or haven't felt compelled to speak previously, today's a really good day to do that. We're going to be doing a deep dive into the meeting matrix that you guys have seen of the recommendations and asking for your responses as far as the prioritization exercise goes. So if you, I think Cadence is going to say this in just a few seconds, but I think if you have any concerns about needing more time or you want to have a conversation about any of it, I would just again encourage you to raise your hand and be vocal about what's needed to be thoughtful about this recommendation prioritization process, because the outcome of today will be folded into our report moving forward. And given that it's September, and this work is due to the legislature by the end of December, we've just got a couple months left to really hone in on the final product here. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Cadence. But just again, thank you so much for all the work that's gone into this from all of you. I really appreciate all the emails that have come in with feedback and the questions and the individual conversations we've had. I'm just really grateful for the time and energy spent and the status of the work so far. I think we're in a really good spot. So I'll stop there and turn it over to you, Cadence. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And I'll just start for a second and then turn it over to Leanne, who'll really get us kicking off. I just wanted to echo what Angie had to say. We're going to talk to you a little bit today about where we've been, and then spend the bulk of our time together really prioritizing recommendations. And so a couple things. One, we're going to use a system called Vivox. And so it would be great if you had your cell phones available. If you do not, that's okay. We can have you post your prioritization and answers in the chat, but it would be helpful if you have your cell phone so you can go to the Vivox site when that time comes. And also we have a lot of time today, but it would be very helpful if you have the matrix in front of you. Leanne will post a link to it in a minute, but that will be helpful as you go along so that you can participate and answer the questions. And if we don't kind of fully satisfy your need to provide input today, we can talk at the end about some other opportunities we can put together just so that everybody feels good that they had their thoughts conveyed and feel solid about where we're going. And with that, I guess I'll turn it over to Leanne to get us rolling.
Are you all seeing the right screen? This is like totally commandeered both my monitors, so I can't see.
Yeah,
Yes.
we've got the first slide.
Okay, great. All right. Uh-oh, now how do I change it? Okay, there we go. So first was just our agenda for today. We'll go back through the project schedule as we normally do. We'll review kind of the key changes to the draft recommendations and then provide an overview of the new recommendations that were added since we last met. And then we'll go through our exercise of prioritizing the recommendations through the polling system that Cadence mentioned. And then we'll also take a peek at the final report outline, which was included in your packet, and take feedback on that. And then we'll go through next steps. All right, here is our schedule as a reminder. We're here at meeting number 4, where we're finalizing the recommendations and trying to get to some priorities to elevate to the legislature in the report. And then meeting number 5, we'll have the full draft report for you to review. And then we'll kind of work on refining it during that meeting. And then we have our final report due to the legislature at the end of December. Okay, so a quick overview on how we refined the recommendation. So we took all the discussion that we had during the third work group meeting in July, and we received a ton of comments, really helpful feedback from the work group, from several work group members and other partner agencies that we've been working with. And then we conducted an additional 12 interviews with jurisdictions, providers, and some nonprofit childcare providers and advocate groups since we last met. And so some of at a very high level, some of the key revisions to the matrix, you may have noticed it got kind of a formatting overhaul. We created a new structure to kind of better organize the recommendations by topic area that align with previous project materials and kind of how we've been talking about the different topic areas. And we think it helps kind of orient you all a little bit better, but open to feedback on that as well. And then, yeah, the new categories are land use and zoning, design and building code, licensing, permitting and procedures, and coordination, funding and finance. And then we have a few kind of miscellaneous that couldn't be neatly categorized. We clarified a lot of, not a ton, but in several areas, clarified some language to be more specific and action oriented. We provided some additional actions for implementation consideration. So that second column next to the actual recommendation. And then we combined some of the recommendations as well that could and or should be accomplished together for efficiency. And then we removed only 2 recommendations just based on redundancy. And then we wanted to spend some time talking about a specific ask in the bill. So here's the language in the italics over here. So the bill asks us to identify and analyze specific barriers and challenges to siting, building, or renovating early learning and care facilities, including barriers and challenges for co-location of affordable housing and childcare facilities. And so the barriers report captures a lot of the sort of like regulatory challenges that co-location faces, which are very similar across other types of childcare facilities. So all of those land use and zoning pieces and some of the building code components apply to co-location scenarios. And so we feel those are pretty well documented in the barriers report, but there are some nuances that I think are important to elevate as well that aren't directly an ask in HB 2727, but definitely deserve acknowledgement. And so these are the sort of set of things we've been discussing at length related to childcare broadly. So the regulatory barriers, which are all the things we've documented in the report, so zoning and land use policies, childcare licensing requirements can kind of conflict with typical housing designs, especially for home-based providers and apartments. So that really touches on the co-location piece. Design complexity, so those unique requirements of childcare facilities, classrooms, bathrooms, kitchens, outdoor space, those all become more challenging in co-location projects as well. But then there are some more nuanced barriers that, again, we weren't asked directly to address in HB 2727. So those are some of the coordination challenges. There's no formal way to connect housing developers with childcare providers yet. There are the timelines for, you know, sort of when you build a development and childcare operation fundings don't align and can create issues for getting childcare facilities in, you know, ground floor commercial spaces. If they don't have funding yet. And then some of the capacity constraints. So childcare providers often don't have the expertise in facility developments, fundraising, complex legal and financial agreements that are required when you're sharing space with residential development. I mean, although this process we've met with some incredibly savvy childcare providers who have really found a way to make things work, and we give them major props for navigating those processes because it's very challenging and very challenging to become an expert in. And on the flip side, housing developers also lack knowledge about childcare licensing and facility requirements. And then rural areas specifically face challenges finding qualified contractors. So the labor that's necessary to build a mixed use development is sometimes lacking in rural areas. And then there are the financial barriers. So prevailing wage requirements is a big one. They significantly increase the cost of constructing commercial space that childcare requires. So it can add I think 10 to 20% to total development costs. And then limited funding exists for these types of projects, and providers struggle to access capital to get them off the ground. And then at the same time, childcare operates on very thin margins, so making it difficult for providers to take on some of the debt that might be required or commit to those long-term leases that housing developments want to see.
Leanne, before we move on, Annalise has her hand up. I don't think you can see.
I can, yeah. Go for it.
Okay, I was just gonna say, and you sort of touched on this just a few seconds ago. It's interesting, a couple of providers that I've been talking to lately who are constructing or were retrofitting buildings for childcare space, for center space. It's interesting how even the contractors and the engineers and the people doing this work find challenges in, they just don't have enough experience doing childcare spaces. And so even they, the professionals, miss parts or components that are required or necessary for fire code or for building codes or whatever with childcare. So even the childcare providers don't necessarily know, the housing and planning people don't necessarily know, the landlords don't necessarily know, and even the experts who are supposed to be coming in don't necessarily know. So it's sort of almost new territory a lot of the time for everyone to blaze that trail.
Mm-hmm. And that definitely tracks with some of the conversations we have with providers who hired an architect, but that weren't necessarily experienced in the development of childcare facilities. They also, struggle to get through the process. But I know Peter can probably speak to that. He's our resident childcare architect professional.
Well, we certainly like to think we know what we're doing, but Annalise, it's a great point because a lot of the subtleties in the newer regulations, which are well intentioned, just require time for us all to kind of process and absorb as an industry, frankly. So great point.
Yeah, just the sheer complexity of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which kind of for me is, it sort of boggles the mind that there's so many moving parts under so many different agencies, under so many different administrative rules. That seems like, that in and of itself just seems like a barrier that we should as a state be able to address.
Agreed.
All right, anyone else? Any other hands, Cadence, before I press on? Okay. I'm really flying blind here. Okay, and then these are some of the new recommendations that we added to the matrix since we last met. I don't know if I guess I'll read through all of them really quick just to touch on them, but they're summarized. Update licensing languages to allow certified family childcare homes in a range of residential units. So making sure it's clear where childcare can be allowed, whether it's a duplex, a triplex, an apartment, making sure that that's kind of broadly allowed. And then exempt certain types of site changes from triggering conditional use modifications review. We talked with a lot of providers who encountered this challenge, and so we made sure to put a specific ask for it in the recommendations. And then create a statewide database of childcare providers and housing developers interested in that co-location. As I mentioned, that system doesn't exist today, and there are a lot of developers who are interested in it, and obviously a lot of childcare providers who are as well. And then create a regional coordinator's position. This has been an iterative recommendation, I would say, throughout, and has maybe of the recommendations had a few different lives, but there's a clear need for someone who can kind of be somewhat of an expert as much as someone can, and provide and be sort of a central point for answering questions or kind of pointing people in the right direction. And then create a dedicated grant program for childcare facilities. I know that there are some out there right now. This recommendation also kind of encapsulates maybe an option to just centralize all of the current grant opportunities that exist and put them all in one place that a childcare provider can go to and see all their options in one place, because they're sort of all separate right now. Allow waivers or split determinations for prevailing wage requirements in co-location. As I mentioned, those are prevailing wage requirements are a big barrier for those co-location projects just because of the increased cost. And so that split determination might ease that a little bit, or waiving it outright. And then adding co-location as a scoring criteria on the LIHTC allocation. So making projects that prioritize co-location or propose co-location more competitive for those tax credits that affordable housing developers are chasing. And then establish a local tenant improvement program for childcare providers. So, you know, this can be more of a local option for communities that have the ability to do so. So implementing a program like this, where a childcare provider can have access to funds to take on some of those commercial spaces that need to adapt for childcare. And then reduce or remove frontage improvement standards for childcare facilities in a change of use application. This can be a big surprise during the development process for providers, you know, identifying a space and sort of being hit with those new sidewalk or, you know, kind of whatever infrastructure requirements that relate to frontage improvements on properties. And then I will turn it over to Cadence to kind of take us through our prioritizing exercise. I'm going to get my phone ready so I can test with you all.
All right. So this is we want to ask you all a series of 9 or 10 questions today. And some of them might feel a little bit repetitive, but what we're really trying to get at in the first set of questions is focusing on recommendations specifically to serve our specific populations, right? Whether it's rural folks, our BIPOC providers, and going back to the bill really actually requiring us to talk about recommendations and offering recommendations to reduce disproportionate racial and regional disparities. So for example, you might have a favorite recommendation that you think would be great statewide, and we want to know about that. And that might help all communities, but there might be more targeted recommendations that would specifically benefit BIPOC providers or rural providers. And we want to highlight and call those out specifically as well. Not just because the bill says to, but because it's the right thing to do. And so we'll go through a series of questions next to first tease out for specific populations what we think the highest and best recommendations might be, and then some more questions about just general recommendations that you think should be prioritized in the report. Next slide. Okay, so Vivox. You can do it 2 ways. One, you can just go to your browser and type in vivox.app and then enter in the session ID, or you can use your cell phone and scan that QR code and it will take you exactly where you need to go. And if you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand, but why don't we all kind of take a minute and do that now? And it should look like this. Can you guys give me a thumbs up or when you get it? And if you got any questions, please either raise your hand or unmute. Okay. Yep. All right, let's do it.
Go on. Everyone
Yep.
okay.
Let's and we don't need to go fast. We've got some time. And so if you guys get bored, let me know and I'll pick up the pace, but I don't want anybody left behind. So the first question we've got is, which topic area do you think will have the biggest impact on addressing equity concerns? And basically, you can start voting now. I'm not going to vote. though I'm tempted to. And you can see in the upper left, 8 of you have provided responses.
Angie, how many participants do we have in the meeting? Can you see that easily
Looks-
without counting?
Sure. No, it says there's 31 of us in the room right now. And just to be clear, Kelly and I are not voting as we remain neutral and facilitating, but there are 2 DLCD
Yeah.
reps on the team.
So
So-
Leanne, could you go back? Yeah, sorry. Could you go back to the QR code for a second? Yeah. Yeah, we're not gonna probably get to 23 because I also logged on and won't be voting, so. Now go back to the question, please.
Looks like we're probably holding strong at 23. 25. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
all right, let's
Call.
do it.
Second.
Oh, I was like, that didn't work.
Yeah, there's a little delay, so
you try your best to make sure that this goes as smoothly as possible, and it worked.
it just takes a second to catch up to us.
So let's just pause here for a minute, and it looks like licensing, funding, and finance tied for yes, please. Let's fix those, and land use and zoning coming in a pretty strong third.
That's enlightening.
Yeah. Does anybody want to make a comment about how that resonates or doesn't with what you thought? Oh,
Sorry.
Well, one of the things I wanted to lift up was that there are 3, and sorry, Dana Hepper from Children's Institute. There are 3 processes underway at the Department of Early Learning and Care that are looking at licensing. There's a child care center rack, there's a child care home rack, and there's a micro center pilot underway. And so I agree that licensing is a really important piece of accessibility for childcare. And I don't know if it's like the best use of this group's time, because the purpose here was to bring together the licensing folks and the childcare, but with the building and zoning and land use folks.
yeah. Thank you for highlighting that. And maybe what we can do is just make sure we're really super clear about the ongoing work that DELC is doing with the racks to address ongoing issues. And we want to make sure that we're uplifting that so that when that work is finished, that everybody knows that implementation from those pieces is important for the whole system. Yeah. Annalise.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, I'm piggybacking off of what Dana just said, because I think that's really important. Licensing from the union's perspective, and I'm here, from our union. I think that from our family childcare union. But I don't speak for for centers, but I think I just think it's important, to elevate that issue that Dana did, because licensing is the least of childcare providers' worries. And there are always exceptions to those rules. Anything that has to do with building, there's exceptions to, and you can get exceptions pretty easily. So I think this was a hard one to pick, but I think for the provider doing childcare, every day, boots on the ground, I think what really makes the difference, in my opinion, is the building codes, because for equity and for equity concerns, because lower income providers and providers of color tend to, just from reports, from statistical information that we have, tend to be renters instead of owners of the property. And those building codes can impact them, disparately. And they tend to, and then, your RF providers tend to be the lowest income of all the licensed types. And So then those building codes, if they're in a building that they're renting and they can't get past those building codes, that just becomes a barrier. So for me, I'm personally elevated the building codes,
So
because I think from providers' perspective, it's getting through past those things, and that's really what we've heard over and over and over again. It's not necessarily land use and zoning, although that's probably a larger center issue. It's really about getting through those building codes and helping those lower income folks who really can be, I can't underscore it enough. They really can achieve the American dream through owning a childcare program and becoming self-sufficient and being an entrepreneur and whatnot. There are amazing stories out there, and it just seems to be that building codes tend to be the thing that the really big thing that gets in the way.
Yeah, I think what you might see is that bottom one where they're saying funding and finance, is that the cost to do the improvement is a barrier, but the doing of the improvement, it's like that it might be building code requirements that are creating some of the costs that are resulting in the need for the money. Yeah, money and time. I see that, Dana. Yes, Fernanda.
Yeah, I also wanted to give my opinion of like in funding and finance. I think most of the times the barrier could be how the process to get that funding or grants or getting into the programs incentives is for providers, because first is a lot of time, then the process tend to be very long and very complicated. The language barrier is also something like not all the grants have like translators or other languages or people that will help you go through those things. And some providers cannot do the technological aspect of that. So I think the barrier that I've seen in that getting the funds to make this barriers go away, getting the incentives all connected to programs, is also like how we get the access to those people to actually be able to participate and don't be left behind just because they couldn't understand the language or they couldn't understand how to participate in these things. So I think that will be a very good aspect to address inequity concerns.
Yeah, thank you so much for raising that. So it's not just have the money, but make the process to get the money both accessible and also not so complex and time consuming. Yeah, thank you. Peter.
Yeah, thanks. Just building on Cadence on your comment and actually on all the comments so far, just thinking about, you're absolutely right. The permitting and the process can be very, very complex for folks who don't do this on a regular basis. And I think if we follow that upstream, it just leads back to the finance picture, because to the extent that those folks have access to like pre-development and early assistant grants, they can then hire professionals to go help them navigate through these different hurdles. So I just wanted to kind of build on that comment.
Yeah, thank you. Jennifer.
Hi, I'm from a CCR&R, so I'm helping providers get licensed, registered family, certified family. I don't work with certified centers so much. My focus is more on the registered family, exempt provider type. And I know that one of our hardest things with licensing is looking at the buildings. Can they get into the buildings? And then the finance. I think it all goes together as a piece, not just necessarily separately. Funding's important, but the licensing requirements have to be to where the funding and the licensing, they can all mesh together, as well as the building code. So if we have a provider in an apartment, and how do they get up to code with licensing and have the funding to do it? It's not just three separate things, it's all together. And then the other part of the licensing requirement piece that concerns me is, and I don't know if I'm off because I was reading the thingy, is one of the barriers, 1.3, allowing childcare centers into rural or into, smaller communities into the homes and all that, we have to be careful if we're allowing certified centers into certain areas because they will put your registered family out of business. I've had that in my counties. I had one county, I lost over 5-6 providers, registered family providers in one town because a business opened a certified center in that town to help their staff, but they didn't realize that their staff work odd hours. So closing those buildings, even though that wasn't their intention, is rough. So looking at building codes, we need to make sure that the certified centers, if they come in, are not going to put out the rural, the registered families or the certified families that are already there and established.
Thank you. Leslie, did you had your hand up for a minute? Did you have something you wanted to also say?
I do, thank you. I think when I look at all the choices, the thing that I've experienced in my own personal journey as a family provider, center developer, et cetera, is not any of these one things. So I got financing, I understood licensing, but it was really having someone navigate that for you, because oftentimes people will give you incorrect information, licensors, whomever else, and you need to have a trusted person that does know all the processes and make sure that you're getting the right information, that the navigation of this is very costly. So I've hired professional architects, and if they are not specialized in this, they can make mistakes too. So you need to have someone that knows all the things that you can fact check some of this. Because, you know, I was very savvy. I had a list of things that go down there and ask questions, but sometimes you don't know the person on the other side of the table is making a mistake. And those things cost a lot of money. So the coordination and navigation at all of these things, like we talked about having someone at the state that helped with the licensing, because there would be a licensor based on their own lens that would tell you something that wasn't necessarily accurate and you didn't have a place to fact check that. So I think the navigation and coordination helps you with financing, you know, permitting, all those things, because these are all humans in there. Some of them are just making mistakes, but someone that's an expert that can really say, well, actually, this is actually the rule about that. Let's check on why they're telling you this, you know, and if you don't know those things, you're going to make a lot of costly mistakes. So I think the coordination and navigation for folks of color in particular, because oftentimes when you're getting just mistakes, it feels like racism. You don't know if they're doing it because of just an honest, you know, professional mistake, or they're discriminating against you. And so when you're used to being in a space where you feel like you're discriminated, it can feel like that. And so I think to have, you know, we talked about ombudsmen, navigators, all these folks that really have the facts that can help advocate for the person who may be navigating this on their own is also very critical in these processes.
Yes, thank you so much for highlighting those issues. So the next question is getting more into the granularity, and we've talked about some of these, so don't be surprised. But there's also, if you move to the next question, Leanne, there's also a place where you can put stuff in the Zoom chat. So the next question is, which of the following actions do you think would be most effective in reducing racial disparities in access to early learning and care facilities? And so some of these things we've just been having conversation about, but now you can vote. And if none of those A, B, and C fit, and you want to put D in the chat, please feel free to do that, or do A, B, and C, and then also do something D in the chat. No rules. You can vote in 2 ways. And DLCD staff and Taylor, if you could all sort of be taking notes as we go, just to make sure we extra special capture all of the comments, that would be super helpful. I want to make sure we've got all the things.
I forgot to mention at the beginning, we have Taylor on board taking notes for this discussion. I think we probably have.
Yeah. Let's see how it went.
Last call. Okay. Give it a second. There we go.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it looks important. All these things, you know, seem really important. Clearly, the multilingual resources and support throughout the development and or licensing. This goes to both what Fernanda and Leslie were talking about, having both translated materials, but also people who can answer questions in the language of choice. Because sometimes the prepared materials don't actually answer all the questions. Targeted financial resources, that's great. And then let's take a second to take a look at the chat. I saw Annalise was doing some. Yep, so translated materials, communications available in owner's own language. Yeah. Materials and communications in all areas, not just licensing, right? So that
Oh, I was just gonna weigh in that I think Delk actually does a really great job from what we can see in providing a breadth of languages. But in those local governments, especially smaller ones, they don't often provide materials in different languages.
yeah. Danae.
Leanne said what I was going to say. I wanted to say that I do think the Child Care Licensing Division makes a very concerted effort to support bilingual providers. And but the feedback that I have heard, and this is not just because I work at the Department of Early Learning and Care. I was at a child care resource and referral for 7 years before this. And so I've worked directly with providers. And a lot of the times it is that their city permitting department doesn't have resources available in other languages. They don't have anyone on staff who can explain the processes. So I just wanted to point that out and add to what Annalise said in the chat is that, you know, even though licensing may have the biggest impact, as we saw on the previous slide, that may be because they also have the staff there to support that. And so I just wanted to point out that, you know, really being cognizant would be the right word, cognizant that the licensors can't do it all, and they also aren't the experts in like planning and zoning and permitting, and so making sure that that support is across the board and not just coming from licensing, which I think is what Annalise was alluding to in her comment as well.
Great, thank you. All right, let's move on. So, same general kind of ideas question. Which of the following do you believe would be most effective in reducing barriers to providers in rural areas? We've had a lot of opportunity to talk about the different challenges that arise in urban settings versus rural settings. And we really want to call out and name things that we think would be most effective to help providers in rural areas who have specific needs and experiences. So let's vote, people. I like watching the numbers change.
I'm glad this worked out.
I know, me too. We had it all under control.
I think we're usually hovering around 21, 22. So if anyone has any final votes. All right.
Okay. Grants or low interest loans for renovating or constructing childcare centers in rural communities. And streamlined and simplified permitting processes for using rural residential and commercial spaces for childcare. And then last but not least, clear guidance on what is allowed and help in navigating the various permitting processes. Let's take a look at the chat. So not just simplified the process, but lower cost in rural areas.
A lot of my providers are low income and we are my counties are rural. And so the hardest part is that it's not simple and it's not always clear language. And then it's not always translated correctly when it's translated, depending on who does the translation. But also having it simplified and then lowering the cost, because we are in an underserved area. We are in, a major childcare desert, working with lots of different cultures from lots of different aspects of life. So just making it more accessible and easier for them to get licensed at a lower cost.
Yeah, thank you for that. Mediation and structured process for mediation that is geared at identifying barriers and then working through those barriers to successful resolution. Actually solving the problems. Annalise, you're radical.
I mean, that is my job, right?
Yeah. And then Leslie highlighted getting data on what the needs are.
Yeah, I share that because I'm on several of these work groups, one of the Shared Service Alliance, and to one of the comments earlier, there was a woman stating that a couple of folks at open childcare centers and some of the family child providers didn't have clients anymore, but the center wasn't full either. And it made me wonder, like, did someone build something too big, or what was the need? It might feel like just because your individual program is getting, has a small wait list or something, but really having clear data about needs before you go and invest and build something is really critical. And I know we hear about childcare deserts in general, but what is that number? What does your community need? How many slots are necessary? Those kinds of things to help you really plan. Communities need to invest in that because people are doing things on what they see as the need, and that's kind of small sometimes. And we need to have a collective way to say what the slot need actually is in your community. Because I as a woman was sharing that, I was like, well, maybe she couldn't get clients for years, and maybe you should go work for that other place. If you really want to still work with kids, it's a hard thing to say, but she wasn't getting clients, and that was like, you still want to work with children. Maybe you go work at the center that's doing well. So these conversations have to be had.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to the next question. Okay, so this is where it would be helpful for y'all to have the matrix in front of you. And does everybody have the matrix? And if not, do we need to, Leanne, do you have the link?
I will have to exit out of
Oh.
this second though.
Well then one of our DLCD partners, can you do a link? Thank you, Kelly. So the question is, enter the number, which is that first matrix column, of 2 to 3 draft recommendations that you think would be most effective in reducing disproportionate racial and regional disparities in accessing early learning and care facilities. So we went from sort of the topic area to a little bit more specific. Now we're going to actual recommendations in our draft matrix, and it's going to word cloud, we hope. It's for like the ones that get more votes should be bigger. We'll see how it goes. And yeah, and there's the link, so you can just take a look at what is available for you from the numbers perspective. So 1.1, 3.2.
We're doing well on time, so we can get this.
Sit here for a second. Leanne, there's a question about list them separated by commas.
Oh, that's a good question.
Oh, it says press send after each response.
Yeah, are you able to do multiple? Because then do them separately if you can. I did not test that.
And if anybody is experiencing some difficulty, let us know, but also take your time. We've got plenty of time for you to take a look at the recommendations.
Yeah, there's a series of, I think, like 4 or 5 of these questions where you're pulling out specific ones. So yeah, please take this time to get familiar with them.
And while you're doing that, I will be right.
How are we doing? I can't see the chat, so I don't know if there are any questions.
Looks like we're okay on the chat.
We're getting there. 18.
Okay. Why don't we move on and see if our word cloud.
Well, this is a little bit of an experiment. Oh, let's let Virginia in. All right. I'm a little nervous. It might take this one a minute.
Annalise.
Hi, I just want to raise on your category 3 licensing 3.1, where it says that childcare licensors represent a central point of contact for providers navigating the licensing process, but lack comprehensive knowledge. I don't know that I think that's probably generally true that they lack comprehensive knowledge, but I think that the larger issue is that within DELC, and if somebody from DELC wants to take this and address this, they can, but I think the bigger picture, or the bigger piece, the bigger issue there at 3.1 is that licensing specialists, because of liability issues, are not allowed to get involved beyond the licensing process. They're not allowed. I mean, if they do give advice or they do try to get involved outside of the licensing process, it doesn't tend to go well for licensing specialists. My previous licensing specialist actually got in some trouble right before she retired for getting involved for a child care provider and actually weighing in on other issues outside of licensing. So I think that that issue, really the 3.1, yes, they're a central point of contact for licensing, but they are not a central point of contact for establishing, and they're not going to be a resource for establishing a new childcare program in a new facility, because that's going to exceed the scope of their job. And so that's gonna, it's just, I think a lot of licensing specialists, and I can't really speak for them, but my experience has been that licensing specialists wish that they could do more, but they cannot because of the constraints of their scope of their job.
All right. Thank you, Annalise. Jennifer.
I wanted to speak on that same one. The CCRNRs do work with new providers coming on with licensing. We go through the rules with them. We have the IRF, which is the Register Family guidebook that we help them do part 1 and part 2 so that they know basically what's expected, the rules. And there are check sheets that they use, or we use particularly that show what licensing is going to look for when they come in, whether it's a registered family, certified family, or certified center. This is what they're going to look at. These are the health and safety requirements. And we do, I don't know if all CCRNRs do it, but for us, we do walk through the home with them before licensing comes in, if they want a second set of eyes, as well as provide, you know, things that they might need that they miss, such as the fire extinguisher size, which is a huge one. So CCNRs do part of that, except for the certified centers. We don't normally touch that because that's another whole set of worms in a can that we don't want to open. So we do help with that a little bit, but not as much as we do with the registered family and certified family and exempt providers.
Right, Jennifer, and you know, I think to piggyback off of that, I mean, you make a great point, right? That the licensing piece is usually covered, right? So under 3.1, it's not really especially for family childcare, right? It's not, and I don't think that's the same experience for centers, but I think licensing can be an issue for centers, new centers getting off the ground. But for family childcare, in areas where they're running into permitting or zoning issues or occupancy permit issues, the CCRNRs, sometimes I'm getting calls from CCRNRs. Like I just got one from the Early Learning Hub in Lynn Benton counties. Because beyond licensing, it's the stuff that when it's the issues that go beyond licensing that usually create the barriers. It's not the licensing issues. It's what happens beyond. And there aren't very many people with expertise to be able to help providers beyond that, outside of maybe attorneys or the union. And even licensing can't help with zoning, occupancy permits and all of that stuff, right? That's and if you're renting and you need landlord permission, or if you own but you're not the provider on the license, and there's nobody living in the home in like in a CF situation, because RF you have to live in the home, then that adds a layer of complexity, and there really aren't that many people out there who specialize in navigating that process. And we're pretty successful as a union in doing that for our folks, but and we can usually, I mean, our success rate is pretty high, but again, in every county, there should be someone who can navigate the complexities that trigger beyond the licensing process, because it's not the licensing process necessarily, it's what happens beyond that, right? That causes problems.
Can I add, I like the 3.1 because it feels like there would be someone dedicated to kind of navigate what licensing is asking for with possibly zoning and code. So that's why I was reading this like that. Yeah, because right now licensors they are liable if they say the wrong thing, but this would create another role that kind of helps navigate between the two roles. So I think that it's an exciting idea to have something like that. In a way that they don't have it now, that someone actually that works for Delk that can do that. So that's kind of how I was reading that.
Okay, Mr. Condon.
So I might have missed this whole thing on this one because I read this a little bit differently. And looking at the matrix, I mean, we already know what the barrier is. I was looking and voting more on what the recommendation would be and the intended outcome. Because that's what we're trying. I think what we're trying to achieve is we've already identified a barrier and we know what the barrier is, but what can we, what are the recommendations and the intended outcomes? And so that's kind of how I slated my votes. And I don't know if that was the correct way that you intended it to be, or it was correct. So
yeah, we definitely want to be focusing on the recommendation, not the barrier itself.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I voted on I guess I voted on the barriers, and so then by default all the recommendations that fall for that address that barrier. Sort of, I guess I cheated. I don't know.
Chuck, please.
Thank you. All right, it's time for unpopular local government opinion. Woohoo! Can I get a Yahoo? All right, I'm looking at 1.3, and I'm a little concerned about that. About it feels like a recommendation that talks about change, a sweeping change to local control in our residential zones as far as local planning issues, and it feels a little unfettered to me. And I know it would be very popular with providers and startups, and very helpful to make things more ubiquitous across the state. I get it, but I think it would really change local control and ability to have people focus on what's right for their communities and local government. So sorry, I know it's probably really unpopular, but I feel like I had to say it. So thank you.
Yeah. Dana.
Yeah, I'd love to speak to that one, because I agree there's this local control tension in place with it. And I think there might be kind of a middle ground to strike, because I think one of the things that sometimes gets lost in communication across entities is there are also licensing restrictions in terms of residential zone, right? Because like you're still going to have those same indoor and outdoor square footage requirements from the licensing side. So it's going to be a limited number of residential properties that would actually have the indoor and outdoor square footage that would allow you to go above 16 kids. But where those unique properties exist could be great spaces for a smaller size center. And I think this group, or maybe the one focusing on the micro center pilot, has talked about there is already in licensure kind of a differentiation between a small center size and a large center size that exists. I can't remember if it's like 40 kids or something like that, but that would, basically, I mean, that could be like 2 preschool classrooms, for example, instead of 1 preschool classroom. And if you have a house with a large outdoor space, it's probably at least got to be on a double lot to make that work. It could be the right type of space to meet a community's childcare needs. So I just want us to weigh the local control with also the restrictions that licensure places around like how many kids could be in what kind of a space in a residential community already.
Right. So a potential modification could be permit small childcare centers by right. And that would be kind of an attempt at a middle ground. Okay. Rihanna.
I mean, yeah, that's just where I was going with it, Dana, is that there's a path to make this happen. So it's not like it's not happening. It's just so complicated. So I understand, like, from the regulatory and the oversight, that there's this feeling that if we make a change there, that those communities aren't going to have control. I understand that side of it, but it already happens. It's just that the process is so burdensome to try to make it happen. And I agree that we should still make that a priority, but yeah, maybe have some kind of middle ground. So that topic probably needs a little bit more intensive work.
All right, thank you. So just looking at the answers to this question, 4.1, 3.2, 2.1, 1.3, 1.1 seem like the big ones. And don't worry, in the back office, the technology is counting the specific numbers. So we're not just going by size. We have votes also. And then we did have somebody who voted outside of the word cloud, and we'll make sure that your vote gets counted also. And I think maybe we'll move to the next question. Okay, so the first question was sort of the equity focused priority, and now we get a revote. Just like, what do you think should be considered the highest priority? If we're not going to do anything but 2 or 3 things, what do you think those must be? please feel free to vote.
Kaden, sorry to interrupt. I seem to have been kicked out of the Vivox app
Oh.
or session. I just need the
Same.
session ID to enter in, and then it looks
Okay.
like I can get back there.
It's at the top of the slide right there, that 147 number.
Got it. Thank you.
No problem.
Sorry, where did you say the QR code is? Because I can't find it.
Oh, it's not the QR code. That's but if you just type in vivox.app,
Oh,
it'll
okay.
it'll ask you to submit the ID number, and that's the number at the top on the slide, the 147 number. Okay, is everybody feeling ready? Should we hold a second? 1 minute, okay.
Gaines, I think we have.
Let's do it.
We should probably pick up the pace a little bit. Oh. There we go. 4.1.
Yeah, 4.1 becomes highest priority. Looks like 2.1 and 5.5 are pretty close after that.
6.1. Since my dashboard got commandeered by the presentation, does anyone have the matrix open?
Yeah. So 4.1 is develop a comprehensive guide for local jurisdictions that includes model zoning code, best practices, policies and programs local jurisdictions can choose to implement to incentivize and prioritize childcare. Seems like a good one. And then 5.5, create a position for regional coordinators to provide technical assistance to providers during the licensing and development process. This avoids some of the confusion and concern that some folks had about housing that at DELC, but not acknowledging that folks need help navigating the process. Of course, we want to make more integrated and improvements to the process itself. And even when it's at its most optimal, building stuff and getting licensed to do things, especially childcare, to take care of our children, is going to remain complex, and having navigators to help through that process makes some sense. And then Which one?
That one.
Yeah. Establish state agency coordination agreements between DLCD and DELC and other agencies involved that don't already have agreements. So that's trying to get some state agency integration and collaboration. And then 6.1, create and or expand dedicated grant funding programs for childcare facilities development. Okay. Brad, you said you had a couple concerns about recommendations. We're going to save some time towards the end of our talk today and make sure we leave space for that. And also, of course, we're happy to talk offline or get email feedback as well. But it would be good to have the group be able to hear the concerns so that we can have a little conversation about that.
Thank you.
Okay. Next question. So the last question really focused on highest priority, and the next is, what do you think is the most feasible to implement? So we're getting nuanced in here, but we are really trying to see if, as you slice and dice these recommendations in different ways, what rises to the top. So for this voting session, it's what 2 or 3 do you think are the most feasible to implement? Please feel free to start voting.
Are people able to vote multiple times? Is that no problem on that front?
Okay, everybody done? All right, let's do it, Leanne.
I missed the. Okay. Was this the wrong Oh, I think maybe the.
Uh-oh.
Oh, I think there was just maybe a language difference between the 2 slides.
Okay, so this is the answer to our most feasible question. We will have a spoiler alert. There is a question on which one could be implemented in the short term.
Yeah, so these are the responses to the feasible question. I just, for some reason, the language didn't get tweaked on the result slide, which is weird, but.
Yep. So in this one, 4.1 again is definitely, so the guide. Everybody thinks that makes the best sense and is feasible. 1.1 and 5.1 and 6.1 also, right? Develop and issue official guidance for cities and counties on implementing ORS 329A. So some of these pieces that we've talked about quite a lot over time. All right, let's move on to the next question. Okay. So this is sort of it might be hard to do. It might be a heavy lift, but what do you think is the most impactful thing that could happen across the state? Please vote. And the reason this is important, is that, you know, as we're drafting and talking about the different recommendations, we're going to say, you know, the work group thought that it was important to do this in the short term, would have the highest impact, and also be most feasible thing to do, right? So we're going to be using these as descriptor language and helping to rank and prioritize the recommendations. And I'd also like to point out that the nuance is also important. So we're not going to, we're going to be taking all of the information that y'all are providing, including what you've said in the conversation and in the chat notes. Okay. All right, Leanne, why don't we?
I don't know why okay, yeah. Yeah, I'm seeing something weird, but this is all right.
Okay. So 6.1 gets bigger in this one. Let's take a look again. Create and or expand dedicated grant funding programs for childcare facilities development. Yeah, I mean, that tracks. Dana.
Well, yeah, just wanted to say this obviously has been a priority among childcare providers, and that was the reason that we drafted and passed House Bill 3005 and got the first $50 million into that pot, and hope to continue to secure money. That grant is open now until September 30th. So if folks want to apply, now is the time. And the first round and the next 25 million will be going out next year. So I think we have a strategy under, like, I wouldn't want to build then like a new fund in addition to the childcare infrastructure fund necessarily. Just need to keep, like, it would be great to communicate to the legislature that they should renew the funding for that existing plan. And I would hope right now it's all lottery bonds. So we need some general fund in the mix there too, because lottery bonds limits the uses that are allowable under the law, but not allowable under the funding stream provided.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, this is going to be an unpopular opinion, and no disrespect to Dana Hepper. What we are seeing across the state are new programs popping up, and because of several factors, I mean, this is Multnomah County especially, we're seeing a lot of long-term programs, long-running programs, high-quality programs going out of business, sitting empty, providers going bankrupt in family childcare. But we're also seeing it in centers, especially out in the rural areas. So while I think it's great that we want to throw money at childcare programs, throwing money for new programs, given the shift that has happened over the last 6 months, especially because of the wait list here in Oregon on ERDC. While I get that while we get to throwing money at something is probably, it's a great tool, a great option. Always love to see money in childcare. Right now, some of that money, we're pumping out thousands of dollars to programs that can't keep their doors open because there's no kids to fill their slots. So, and they're going out of business, some of them very quickly. So I just want to throw that out there, that money isn't always the solution. It's easy, right? It's easy, but that things are very different now than they were 6 months ago within this market. And providers desperately want money, but there's now a change in what they need money for. So it's just a complexity that's been added, and I just want to throw that out there, that things are different.
Yeah, thank you for that, Annalise. And I'm Deanna's putting some nuance in the chat, and we'll go to you in just a second, Leslie. But I think one of the pieces that Dana said that I want to highlight is plenty of kids in need, but not enough subsidy so parents can afford the cost of childcare. And I think that helps at least me kind of tie all the points together. You know, how can we have a childcare desert and also empty facilities? Well, the cost of the barrier to entry for families might be too high, which is understandable that childcare providers need to charge that amount so that they can stay afloat. But we've got kind of a multiplicity of cost issues. Leslie.
Thank you. Workforce. So it's just not what we're talking about. That's, people can't hire people. Anyway, when we talk about impact, though, some of the things we overcomplicate. Like if we said today that other toilet was eliminated, that is so impactful to providers, and they would need the grant money to do that. If you were to say today, if I have the square footage to serve 20 kids versus 16, that is so impactful, and you don't need to do a whole lot. You could just say that. And so I think some of those things are super impactful and don't cost a dime. Just write it down, make some of those changes. So eliminating of some of those barriers are simple. And I think that would be so impactful, and they wouldn't need as much money to do these things. So let's get out of the way and progress. I feel like, we're overcomplicating some of these changes. Those things could happen just at the snap of the finger if we allow them to.
Yep. Thank you for that. Okay. Sorry, I'm just for our notes. Whitney.
I totally agree with Leslie as far as simplifying some of the things that we're seeing in the recommendations. And then Annalise, I also hear what you're saying, but on the other end, I would say I know providers specifically that are my age that have worked. I've owned my own in-home before, and I've had to go through the licensing, and I did that while I was renting and had basically no money, but wanted to find a way. And then working for an in-home childcare provider who's been in business now, I think for about 27 years, and did a lot, generations have been with her. And then thinking about my coworker when I was working in this in-home childcare is now starting her own business, and she needs those funds to be able to expand her facility, and she has the mentorship and the expertise to do that. And I'm thankful that I have that specific lens, because I'm going to speak to the people that are 30-something that are looking at our community and our generation. And when we're looking for infant toddler spots, because I have friends that are having babies, but there's not a lot of infant and toddler spots available. And so, she said she's been working with Build Up on a few things, the startup and expansion grant that TRI had, and then also looking at CCIF. And there's some strong guidelines for a provider to need to gain those funds. However, I'm thinking about my generation right now and leadership as well. Like, we're looking to also bring up people that are 15 years younger than us, right? Like, how do we keep this sustainable and ongoing, especially as younger families are growing? There's this talk of some aren't having kids, but then there are some that are having kids. And in my community, there's a lot of us having babies, and we still have to work full time in order to pay our mortgage, because that's high, and we know interest rates are high for those. So I'm just thinking about these startup, like these grants that are being given for providers that are starting up, but they might have known an in-home provider who has a long-standing business, who's giving them that mentorship. And we've got Miso, who's providing amazing TA and tons of options. I'm just thinking, this person had said to me specifically, if I could obtain more grant money, I could open up an entire in-home facility for infant and toddler care within 5 minutes of my preschool that I just opened up. And to see that level and that mindset in this business, and she's got staff in there, we're looking at all those costs that a provider incurs. If you can take the weight off of them of speccing a facility, even for some, if they want to spec, it could be like 60 grand before they even actually make a commitment to that spot or have to end up pulling out. And so I do see the idea of like throwing money at it isn't always the solution, but I know our system is trying to put things in place to support those providers, especially I'm going to say like young people like me who want to know their friends who are opening up a childcare facility. And like, I think you alluded to it earlier, as far as that American dream, giving them the ability to have this funding to open up their own in-home one day. And we're, registered family, they have to start there. And that's where she started. But to see that, and she's involved in the PFA and wants to go with PSP. And so I'm just thinking like that money, the grant money, has done a lot for her to be able to expand her program.
Right. The problem really is there's never enough money for everyone. That's really the problem. In an ideal world, the funding would be there just like it is for K-12, right? And everybody would be equitably funded, right? I mean, I'm not dissing the funding, and I'm not against throwing money at something. I'm not saying that at all, right? I'm just saying that if the barriers are still there, throwing money at it isn't going to necessarily solve the problem. And it's not always, throwing money at it isn't always the answer. Do you know what I mean? So it's not that I'm opposed to my funding. Don't get me wrong. I'm not opposed to funding. I mean, if the state would put billions of dollars into the early childcare industry, I think that would be amazing.
Right. Well, and I think, and Fernanda, I'll get with you in just 1 second. I think one of the things we've struggled with this whole work group is we've been charged by the legislature to look at this one piece of a broad system. We know that workforce is an issue. We know that parents' ability to pay the costs is an issue, and that none of these solutions will work in isolation. We have to be addressing them from multiple angles at the same time. And that is also true in the microcosm of what we are working with. So yes, funding may be a really good support. And that doesn't mean to the exclusion of providing guidance in the form of model best practices or model codes, right? And so we're trying to really tease out some of the nuance of all of that. And I really do appreciate this conversation because I think it will make for a rich product. And Leanne will want to make sure in our report, there's like some basic fundamentals that we are teasing out, right? Like everybody is already really trying very hard. Now, how do we make some improvements? This is another one, which is we need an integrated approach to solutions, and there's no silver bullet. Fernanda.
Yes, I just wanted to share a little bit about this conversation related to my experience. I'm a new program that opened less than 2 years ago. I am a migrant, I'm Latina, and I came to a rural community. And because of a startup grant, I was able to open my center. But also, I agree with Annalise that there are a lot of like strong programs, existing programs, that we're getting to a barrier that we cannot expand because we don't have the funding to make that. The licensing, the struggle to find a space to do it, the workforce. Like, I think like it's good that we incentive new programs to open, but also we need to know that if we put the money on hands-on people that is doing the job already, that has the experience, the knowledge, that has been very active in participating with all the things that will move along to a very successful program, will be well invested. And instead of maybe new programs that are just beginning, and they are just, you know, I know a lot of people that gets the grants, and in the first year they close their doors. So we also like, that's the balance that I think Leslie was saying. So what I see a lot is like, there's a lot of money right now that is going for new spots, for new programs, for new providers, and that's great. But I think that the barrier is that the providers that we are already making the job for 1, 2, 3 years, we're new, we're trying to expand, we have the knowledge, we have the degrees, we're here with the families, we're trying to make this move. We get to this barrier that is so hard to expand because of the costs, because of the language, because of I live in a rural community and there's a lot of need. Like I have a waiting list and I cannot help these families. And I need to charge, I should say, like very big amounts for me to support this program. Just by myself, I cannot go certified because I don't have staff that is professional that can stay with me. So I go on and on with these same barriers. And yes, there's a lot of grants that I can apply, but I don't have, even with the money right now, I cannot go through these barriers. So I just want to say, from my perspective, as me doing what I'm doing right now, I can hear all these conversations. And I think if we don't go through those barriers, not even if we change all the codes and how we get to the access and everything, we're just going to still facing the same problems. And I don't think it's going to resolve anything.
Yeah. Money cannot solve everything. That is 100% true. And I've also heard just like a nuance of startup grants and expansion grants, that it's not like one size pool of funding that will fit all. So thank you for that. Leslie.
Yeah, it has to be comprehensive. I mean, I know that last round of grants that came out and people gave them to all, they wanted to really focus on they didn't have a wraparound service to really support those people expanding. So you will see, hopefully there'll be a report showing who was successful in that, because they didn't have the thing that we're talking about didn't exist. So I think a lot of that money has been wasted. That's just my cursory glance at what happened, because we are throwing money at some folks and underinvesting in others. And so we're going to have still no more childcare. Existing programs closed, new ones can't really ever expand because we didn't do a system of wraparound to get to what we really need. And so I think, and we can't keep saying things are failing. We're failing. The system is failing. Those individual providers didn't fail. And so I just want to say, like, we point to the things we want to do, but we just get the guide out there and don't have the navigation. This is not going to work. It has to be hand in hand. Yeah, I can't emphasize that enough. Please don't just come out with a guide and let people just be out there on their own.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And also, right, businesses do fail, right? Like, so that also happens. So like, how do we give as many supports as possible, funding so you're not on fumes when you get started, navigation support so that you can move through the system as well as possible, guides so that actually all the people you're talking with also know what they are doing and the system is as simple as possible. Yeah, I think, and then of course, on things outside our scope, how do we enable families to be able to pay for what it is that we're offering? Whitney.
I do want to say, I love that, Leslie, you pointed out, you really want to see the results of the startup and expansion and how that worked. And I will say I was talking to TRI about that as well. And what does that look like? And what does it look like now that there's TA providers? So they're actually going to do an analysis of both, which I'm really excited to see. That won't be done until the end of December, but I think that's a really good call out, because that's what's going to help us understand where the navigation, like where there's gaps in the navigation. So I really appreciate that call out. That's what I'm going to say. And I completely agree. We can't just continue to fund facilities and also not look at the support that's being given to the providers. And I'm saying that, and I'm biased because I'm in this position right now of early learning and business supports. And so my focus is there's funding for facilities. And then I also want to see the focus on helping providers like have sustainability within their business and not having to close their doors after the first year. But it takes money and time and capacity to be able to understand what gaps those providers are seeing. And again, bias, I did my action research on workforce barriers for providers specifically. And I was a student not working for Delk at the time. And I got a special lens into hearing from providers across our state. What are they experiencing? What do they want to see change? And so I feel like this is a very special opportunity to be here now and engaging with this and seeing the work moving forward. And that I don't have to just be a student doing the research for free, but this is actually happening. So that is what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Whitney. Sean.
I just real quickly, I just want to say I appreciate what Ms. Barnes was saying about tying more of training, obviously, of a document, because I mean, we do that here with all of our fire marshals when we adopt a new code. Even though the code is the same year after, every 3 years, we still do a statewide class on what things have been amended, what things have been changed. And we're educating those fire marshals and those fire inspectors and those deputy fire marshals or whatever, whatever classification you call at them. But we're making sure that folks understand that. And I would say that, it would be criminal to put something out and not educate folks on it. So I know you are thinking about that, but I really believe that's a very helpful piece of the puzzle. And like I said, we do that statewide with the fire code. So
yeah, great. Thank you. So folks, I want to leave us some time to have some more free-form discussion. There's a couple questions at the end. So we're going to go through one more poll question. And it's the next one, Leanne, which is, which of the recommendations do you think would be the most cost effective to implement? And so I'm going to modify this question. So please, yeah, do the polling of the recommendations we've got. But but if there are other things that you want to put in the chat that you would think would be simple, cost effective recommendations, please also feel free to freeform that in the chat. So go now, and then we'll move to a different kind of Q&A.
And maybe in the meantime, if the DLCD wants to remove the scribble, that might be helpful on our final slides.
Cadence question regarding this one. This one's so just to cost effective from whose perspective, I guess.
The entity that would be implementing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Could I also add one other kind of question to that? Follow-up question. Follow-up. Could one consider the return on that cost or return on the investment dollars as a lowering the cost?
We had an impactful question. This is sort of like what is the cheapest thing to do, right? So, it would take some amount of money to eliminate the second toilet requirement, but it wouldn't take a whole lot of money to eliminate that requirement.
Yeah.
Whereas, right, providing navigators in every county in the state would be incredibly impactful, but would also be expensive ongoing, right?
Got it.
Yeah, I think the second toilet elimination for CF programs, I think that's in the new proposed rules already.
That would be rad.
So I think that's not going to be an issue much longer, hopefully.
Yeah, I think we did note that it is, I think at the time when that recommendation made it into the matrix, it was under consideration. So we felt like we would keep it just in case it didn't go through. But if it has gone through, then we can remove it.
Oh, it's so close. maybe by the time we have our last meeting.
Well, then that's great because then the legislature can go, that one's done already. By the time the report got to us, we were already winning. Okay. Why don't we go to the next, reveal the cloud. Okay. Let's look, what's 3.9? .9 is revise the requirement for an additional 50 square feet per child after 12 children for certified family childcare. .4 exempt certain types of site changes from triggering the conditional use modification review. What else do we want to look at? 1.1 maybe again. Develop and issue official guidance for cities and counties. Okay. Okay. 3.9 is also being considered. Revise the requirement for an, oh yeah, additional 50 children. Okay. So now, Leanne, feel free to skip through that last question. We'll just avoid that one since we're running a little bit short on time, and we'll go to, yeah, what's missing? So are there any recommendations not currently included that you want to see added? Yes.
I don't know if it's an ad. I think I have a question about recommendation 1.1. I was going back and looking at the first report that Echo Northwest created for like maybe our second meeting. And one of the things that it lifted up was that legislation that AFSCME led on to clarify that, you know, residential zone should allow home-based childcare and commercial zone should allow center-based childcare is in like the childcare section of law. And it's not like in the zoning and land use section of Oregon revised statute. And so I've been wondering about that bill. Should we actually seek to pass legislation that actually impacts the zoning section of law? And isn't it, and we can leave the childcare one for, you know, comparability, like to have it mirrored in both parts, but to have it in the part of law that people who work in zoning and land use are most familiar with and look at and refer to. So we, and it also seemed like there were some maybe different definitions, which I don't know. I don't know zoning and land use statute well enough to understand whether those misalignments are in the statute and therefore need to be adjusted there, or whether they're just an administrative rule and need to be adjusted there. So it's a question, potentially modification of that 1.1 that's come up a lot here. Like, is it really just implementing the existing statute, or does something else need to happen statutorily that would support implementation of the intention of the statute?
Yeah, and this one, the next column over says seek legislative clarification. And so I think there might need to be a statutory tweak. What that is exactly, I am not sure. Leanne might have other thoughts on that. Oops, sorry, you're on mute.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I couldn't find myself. Sorry, I was getting rid of the scribble. What was your question?
Oh, it was just the issue was around 1.1, developing and issuing official guidance for cities and counties on implementing 329A. And Dana was asking, is it just guidance, or do we actually need a statutory fix? And my sense was, given the more details, that we do need, we think, some statutory clarification. And yeah.
Yeah, I will invite DLCD to kind of weigh in on that because they're more in the weeds than we are. But I think there were a few components of that statute that are sort of vague, like how do you regulate childcare as a residential use? Like, what does that actually mean in practice? And the definitions piece is sort of, it actually comes up more when there's like different thresholds for types of childcare facilities in local codes. They might have 13 versus 16 for a center and a family. So that's sort of where we were making recommendations locally to align with state definitions. And that is actually sort of more at the licensing level, just to make sure you're not sort of artificially limiting the size of facilities locally.
Oh, sorry. We just have a note here from Kelly saying that they've been discussing with the Department of Justice on the best way to clarify the statute. So they're on it, which is good. Fernanda.
Yeah, I don't know if with this recommendation I'll be a little out of topic, but I just wanted to point it out because I can see that this is something that is growing in our country and specifically in Oregon. But I think one of the recommendations can maybe be also taking in advance the new licensing bill that has passed last year regarding to nature and forest preschools. I'm one of the nature preschools here in a rural community, and it's something that I can see that also can solve some of the licensing and barrier requirements regarding to space. Right now, if you're a registered family, you just need to register your home and you can do the nature preschool on your property. But talking about more the barriers that certified or centers will go through if you're doing this in a forest or in a setting that has a big outdoor space. But in rural communities like I live, it's not uncommon that we can use the outside property to expand capacity and have more of the families and kids and invest on the outdoor space to expand these lots. And this will provide a little more equitable for the families that live around in rural communities. And I know that this is something very new and is getting there, but I think we should include that too, because this is something that is happening. And I think in my recommendations, this is something that might mitigate some of the barriers that we are already facing right now.
Yeah, thank you, Fernanda. If you wouldn't mind, if you could send a follow-up email to us, to DLC, whoever, to Kelly or Angie, or Leanne or me, just with a couple specifics about what you think that recommendation could look like, we would really appreciate that, because I understand the idea that you're talking about for sort of outdoor childcare. I just want to make sure we word any recommendation carefully. Brad.
Yeah, I think I had made a recommendation earlier, but just wanted to bring it up again, possibly a liaison person between all these different state departments that would be kind of a specialist on childcare that could speak with some authority to the requirements of all the different, the building codes and fire and DELC and everybody, because that's that 4.1 is somebody creating that document that would explain all these different requirements. But since they're always changing too, somebody would have to keep updating that or whatever. So it'd be nice to have a person that we could recommend they go talk to that could speak with authority for all the different or knowledgeably of all the different requirements. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Leslie.
When I think about what's missing and I go to the financing side of this, I hear us talking earlier about equity and access, but I don't see it called out specifically when it talks about access to funds here. And so there are actually known areas, for example, in North and Northeast Portland that were redlined, and those Black and brown families had to give up their property due to some practices in banking, et cetera. And I feel like there should be some prioritization to access the funds if you can actually point to an area. One of the things we heard earlier too is a lot of those folks don't have a home or did not have access to get a center historically. And so again, the balance of new people, why they don't have access, all those things should be thought about. And it's not called out specifically when it talks about access to funds. We've talked about it here, but I don't see it called out. And I feel like that is missing. And I know there's already efforts in our area in particular, like I'm thinking about the Kaiser property, Legacy and Manual, they're already talking about right to return, access to funds, prioritizing people that were discriminated against in the past. And I think that you should align some of this to that kind of intention, and it should be called out here, and that's what's missing for me.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, next question, Brad, this one's for you. What do you have concerns about in the current recommendations? We've talked about some of them. Leanne, if you could advance the slide, that'd be great.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah. And so throughout our couple hours together, we've got a few different people taking notes, but if there are anything additional or things you want to reinforce that are concerning about the proposed recommendations that you'd like to call out. Chuck has some nerves around around losing local control, and as a former local government person, I get where you're coming from, and also some of the state preemptions have been pretty impactful around the state, and so it's just a real question about how and when and in what cases does the state use that power? Yeah. But what else?
Could Brad say more about that? I guess I'm trying to figure out how that would flesh out. If I'm in the community, are you worried about people coming from outside the community and developing? I just want to hear more about the concern about losing local control.
I think you might be talking about Chuck, not me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, Chuck, do you want to talk about some of the issues around sort of usurping local control and allowing centers by right in residential areas?
Yeah, I just think that I would like to just talk to my building and our planning folks. I'm just a little concerned about unintended consequences and what happens with local land use that is very specific to communities. I mean, Brad has approaches in Bend that, even though we're under the same state land use laws, that are different than our approaches in Redmond. And, we can tailor those things, very small nuances, to fit our community better, to fit our needs. And even though our communities are only 15 miles apart. And so I'm a little concerned that a couple of those ones that I called out in the chat just could have unintended consequences and create a slippery slope of losing too much local control while maybe not creating a lot of gain for new facilities being created.
Thank you.
Cadence, I can talk about the couple that I was concerned with. The 2.3, let me revisit what it was. Right now, the building code requires that if you're going to do a childcare center, it has to be submitted and designed by a licensed professional. So the guide is a good idea because I think that licensed professional could do the work quicker and cheaper, but it doesn't get rid of the fact that you still have to pay for an architect or an engineer, and that can be pretty pricey. So don't know if that's a concern. I mean, building wise, we love having the architects do it because that ensures a level of knowledge on their part, but it does make it a lot more expensive for the person. So, and then the other one I had was 3.7, where we talked about recommending, I think in the description it says, allowing family childcare in apartments and duplexes and triplexes. It really only said the applicable people were DELC and licensure, but I think building codes wise, we would need some changes there too. So just a lot of our allowances are trumped by that ORS 329 that says what you can do, and that would need to be changed to allow attached structures and apartment structures and things, because right now it just kind of says detached, and you're not allowed to put them in apartments. So just wanted to bring that up, that it should also include some building code changes or that ORS.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Rihanna.
I just was going to share with Brad, like that's where it comes back to some of the things that we've been talking about here in the misalignment. I'm working on opening a center, and I have hired an architect, and for the last 3 months, he's been working with my county building code, and there are not clear guidelines. There's so many discrepancies that it's cost me $14,000 and I still don't have approved permits. Like, that's unacceptable. That's just unacceptable. And providers shouldn't be going through that. So that's why we need that guidance.
Yeah. Thank you, Rihanna. And I'm sorry, it's expensive and it's complicated. Dana.
Yeah, I wanted to lift up recommendation 3.3, which suggests that DELC align their language with BCD's language around types of childcare. And I just wanted to raise the question of whether it should go the other way around. Like, why wouldn't BCD align their language with DELC's? Because DELC is the childcare expert. So I don't know enough but I was like, I wonder why it's written that way instead of the other way around. So I wanted to recommend a possible change to that. 3.3. And then I think I said this before, but I think 3.1 is the licensors playing this kind of navigation role with all the local entities. It seems like out of scope for DELC. And I think 5.5, which is like have these local coordinators, maybe would be a better approach, but it says DELC would be the leading implementing agency. And I'm not sure if that's right either. Like, I don't know I'm not sure that DELC should be the one that's like hiring or funding these local coordinators to navigate the city and county processes. So wanted to flag that there might be an agency misalignment there. And then wanted to respond to 3.7 in terms of the multifamily. We did a big look when we, Children's Institute and AFSCME worked with some legislators and the entities that represent multifamily. Multifamily Northwest was one of the entities there, and looked at the rights of renters to operate childcare inside their rental homes, and passed some legislation to try to make some progress on that. There's still some challenges, obviously. But one of the things that was a big aha to the multifamily folks was that there is so much square footage requirement. There are very few townhouses, duplexes, et cetera, that actually have the square footage that allow, and that indoor and outdoor, that allow for more than a registered family, which is capped at 10. So again, I think the concern might be rising from a lack of understanding of the licensure requirements that already create extensive limitations. But sometimes there are those properties, it's like, it's a large duplex, for example, and that it would make perfect sense to allow 16 kids in a large duplex space, the large outdoor area. It's just the structure of the home was built that way, but there's plenty of space to allow for it. That I think, I just want to make sure we're not raising like theoretical concerns, but that our concerns are really grounded in the actual regulations and requirements of childcare that I think would inherently, like, for example, you can't provide childcare on a second floor. So that limits like most apartments, right? Because you just can't have large groups of kids that you would need to like evacuate in case of fire or emergency or something like that. The last thing I wanted to say about that is we were working with a builder who wanted to site creating a new housing development and wanted to include a childcare center as one component on the ground floor of one part of this large housing development that had outdoor space abounding, like a big courtyard area, et cetera, and couldn't do it because of the zoning regulations. It was a residential zone that they're building these apartments in, so they couldn't include a childcare center. So they finally figured out a way to include two home base, like two 16-kid locations in the ground floor, convert two of the units from housing layout to, they needed to get all of these waivers from both childcare licensure and their city. So those are the other types of things where it's like, it would have been so much easier for them to just say 40 kids center co-located with an apartment complex instead of doing these backflips to try to respond to all the local and state regulation.
Thank you, Dana. Channel. So just a time check, folks. We're going to want to wrap up here pretty soon, but I want to get through this last question and comment. So please.
Yes, thanks. So on 2.1, the description indicates like BCD to provide clarification for when the section, the Oregon Instructional Specialty Code section 420.12.2 with there's no changes of use or building permit is required. And I just am kind of curious, like who would verify those requirements? Just because at least it's been my understanding by BCD that, you know, local jurisdictions need to create a process, and that would be kind of up to the jurisdiction. But at least for the city of Portland, our process is a building permit. So I'm just kind of curious, like who would be verifying those requirements with that recommendation?
That is a really excellent question.
I'll just during some of our engagement for this process, there are some jurisdictions who just require a kind of like streamlined inspection to verify those requirements. And I don't know if maybe Brad, I can't remember because we've talked with a lot of jurisdictions. If Bend is one of those that just does kind of a streamlined inspection process.
Yeah, I can honestly say not very many people come in to get a permit for this. So unless licensure kind of notifies us of it, but yeah, when they do, I think we can streamline it and make it a single inspection because typically they just want to verify that they don't need sprinklers, and there's very minimal amount of requirements in that case. So we have done that, but I think if there was a little better integration with licensure and then us being able to do an easy verification or even licensure verifying that it meets those small building requirements, that we could avoid a longer permit process and especially statewide. I mean, each jurisdiction is going to have their own process, and it could be cumbersome for some people.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we got a couple minutes left. Leanne, we to go to the next slide, please. Our next steps are really to start taking all of the information that we've gathered thus far, what we talked about today, and put it into a final report. And so guess what, folks? Y'all are going to have some reading homework before our next meeting. So apologies for that. We'll try to make it as interesting as possible. But Leanne, if you could go to the next slide. So just generally the report outline, we're going to have an executive summary for those folks who do not want to wade through the whole thing, but we hope that it will be interesting enough, at least to you folks and some key legislators, that they'll read the whole thing, including an overview, the regulatory context, summary of the key barriers, and the recommendations. So you have seen all of these pieces throughout our year together. Now we're sort of condensing it and refining it and putting it into the final report. So it would be startling to us if you came out surprised at the other end of reading this. But we want to make sure that at our next meeting, we afford y'all plenty of opportunity to raise last comments, questions, edits. Please, not grammatical edits unless they are technical in nature and required in order for us to be sending the right message. Yeah, and then that will be it for us, folks. And so it really will be important for you all to take a look at the report before we come. We'll obviously go over some of the big pieces, but we want to make sure by the time that you leave our last meeting that we're all feeling good, that our collective work together has been accomplished, and that some of us might feel a little nervous about some of the recommendations and others will feel like others didn't go far enough, but that on the whole, that you all think that the report recommendations reflect this group's collective effort. Are there any questions before we close today? Or any last things, DLCD or Leanne, you want to add?
Nope. I'll just voice, yeah, don't focus on the grammar or the spelling, but it'll have a professional copy edit before it goes to the legislature. Don't worry.
Yeah.
I would just thank you all for the participation today and all the good comments. I think, especially those that shared unpopular opinions. I think we need that. I think that adds to the rigor and the process and the outcome being as good as it can be. So thank you for that. And I also want to thank Echo. The word cloud worked better than I thought it would. I was a little nervous coming into this meeting today. So thank you. That was a great way to illustrate the outcome. And I took some notes about the ones that rose to the top, and I would just share that the two that rose to the top with four of the 5 votes, or all 5, excuse me, were 4.1, which was the model code and comprehensive guide, and 6.1 was the next one, which was creating and expanding dedicated grant funding programs. And I think we had some good discussion around those topics. So it's nice to be able to quickly see the ones that rose to the top and then be able to support it with all the great feedback that that came up today. So thank you for that. I'm really grateful for the outcomes of this work and looking forward to the final report to work through with you guys in November. So, and if anything comes up between now and November, because it's a ways away, please don't hesitate to reach out. There's still a lot of nuances to work through here. And some of the questions that were raised, like I'm going to send a note to Lindsay Cochran at Business Oregon and try to get some additional information that we can share out with you all. But if anything else comes up in the meantime, please don't hesitate to reach out.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And it's Friday. And we're almost halfway done with it. So good work, everybody. And I hope you all have a good weekend. Bye.
Just really quick, DLCD, if you don't mind sending us the chat record, that would be really helpful.
Yep, we'll send it over. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.